thrilled to have you back for another episode of the Cybersecurity Boardroom, where we focus on cybersecurity and bridging the gap between IT and the business. Your continued support means everything to us, and we're grateful for each and every one of you. Today, we're diving into the realm of cybersecurity in healthcare. It's a critical topic that demands our attention now more than ever. We're excited to introduce our esteemed guest, Rusty Massey. Rusty, how are you?
Hey, you're doing great, Vince. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Thanks for being here. Rusty is an executive with over 25 years of business experience. He spent a majority of his executive career with a Fortune 10 organization and is a recognized leader in the community physician practices space. Together with Rusty, we'll explore how healthcare organizations can effectively align their IT and business strategies to enhance cybersecurity resilience, from understanding regulatory requirements to fostering a culture of security awareness. We'll uncover actionable insights for driving collaboration and synergy between IT and business leaders. As always, we'll be discussing some of the recent breaches that have occurred in the last week or so. These real-world examples serve as a valuable learning opportunity, helping us understand the evolving threat landscape and how we can stay ahead of it. So grab your favorite beverage and get ready for an insightful and informative discussion. Let's empower ourselves with the knowledge to safeguard our business and navigate the digital world securely.
Thanks for that intro, Vince. So yeah, I've got some interesting cyber events here to share with you all. This one is actually pretty interesting. It has to do with Dropbox. A lot of folks use that to share files. Specifically, this has to do with Dropbox Sign, formerly Hello Sign. So this is a service that folks use to sign documents similar to DocuSign. And what happened was threat actors were able to access all kinds of data related to these users, including the emails, usernames, general account settings, phone numbers, hash passwords, API keys, OAuth tokens, multi-factor authentication details. And the breach also affected third parties who interacted with that Dropbox sign. And the breach, so this is an interesting one. Like I said, the breach was actually discovered back in April, late April 24th. So this one kind of slid by us, but I wanted to bring it back to our attention again. And how they were able to do this, these threat actors, they were using privilege escalation. And so, able to, one of the things we commonly talk about is, stolen credentials and phishing as being the main threat vectors.
Yeah, big problem.
Example of that. This is an example of that. And for me, what I take from this is it's really important to have a zero trust architecture set up. It's really important to understand who has what roles within your organization.
Yeah.
And especially take safeguards around having persistent privileged access. When we talk about zero trust and making sure that everyone doesn't have access to everything all the time, really key in a situation like that. And when you talk about third parties being affected, again, this is an example of where you need to be aware of who your data trading partners are, and what sort of security level they're at. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's absolutely key. So it's really multifaceted, right? So yeah, something like MFA, could have had a positive impact on that to at least mitigate the impact. Zero trust is huge because at least with zero trust, now we're able to specify what people have access to. So even if someone does breach, depending on the type of account they're breaching, they'll be able to only access what it is. And some of these zero trust solutions are very specific up to the data or the cell level within data itself. Some of them are tokenized as well. So there's a lot of different features that are available today that really help isolate, even if things are breached. So it's sort of your safety net on your safety net. Phishing techniques, training, all that good stuff that goes without saying. We talk about it to no end. It's just one of the biggest risks that we've got. The human interaction with these attackers a lot of times are what expose us. And in large organizations, like small organizations, you're dealing with vendors, and so you need to be able to ensure that whatever access you provide your vendors with, whether it's privileged or not, or even if it's a service account, you need to be able to isolate them, train them, understand where they are, understand what their policies are, what their practices are, all that good stuff. So yeah, it's absolutely key, and I think would have been impactful in this situation if they had a multifaceted approach.
Absolutely. defense in depth, if you will.
Right.
So this one, not quite a breach, but I found this one quite compelling. So this is actually a story about a fine, right? Cerebral, they are a telehealth company. They've been fined over 7 million for what? Get this, sharing patient data with advertisers. That's who is that? LinkedIn, Snapchat, TikTok. This has been going on since October of 2019. And so I bring this up just to say that, we talk a lot about, some of the costs to a breach or some of the costs to a data leak. And we talk about regulatory fines being one of them. And oftentimes this is a hypothetical. It's like, is this really going to happen? And we've been talking about how the FTC is going to start ramping up activity, ramping up actions against folks. And this is an example, quite a big one, actually. So from my perspective, this is a little bit of an ethical / moral dilemma rather than maybe a technical dilemma, but this is just to let folks know, hey, they're going to start finding you if you're not protecting user data, and especially if you're handing it over to advertisers.
Those lax practices are going to get people caught and in trouble.
Yeah.
Sure, they had no ill intent. It was obviously, it got out there, so one would assume that they didn't mean to do anything bad, but they did something that wasn't correct.
Yeah.
And so understanding the guidelines, understanding your compliance requirements, the rules, the laws around all that are key, because finding out that you've made a mistake can be very, very costly, as we see in this case. $7 million is huge, huge.
Mm-hmm. And not just fines. I mean, think about the reputation of the company. Are you going to continue using Cerebral right now if you know that they've been handing over your data to Snapchat and TikTok?
Yeah. And especially that they're dealing with the general public, right? It's harder to contain also. And so to change or influence public perception is a lot more difficult than trying to influence the perception of a client that is driving activity your way, the commercial that are commercially bound to you for a set amount of time. This is huge when you're dealing with the general public. I mean, it's a one-to-many relationship, and so driving them back onto the side where they see you as a favorable solution is challenging once your reputation's been compromised.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It's kind of a recap, but we're talking about Change Healthcare, and that happened. That particular breach happened over almost a quarter ago, 2 months ago. And we're still dealing with the ramifications of that. Can you believe that? And I thought what was interesting is, so they're in Senate and House hearings now. So just as an example of how things can escalate.
Right.
They're in Senate, like I said, hearings there. And the CEO, he's having to face the music about this stuff. And from what I'm reading, he's not able to give very precise answers.
Mm.
So when we talk about the fallout of a breach and the public facing repercussions, credibility and all that kind of stuff, that's exactly what we're seeing here. And so this is all to say that when a breach happens, it's not one of those things where you can just wipe your hands of it and sweep it under the rug.
Yeah.
Going to continue to be fallout from it. You're going to have to answer to it.
Right. Weathering the storm does not stop. I guess the storm does not stop at the actual breach itself. Mm-hmm. Right. It's that recovery phase. That's the one that usually nips you in the butt. Right. Because that's the one where you need to face the music. That's the one where you need to realign the organization, make sure everything's going the right way, and where people are going to ask you questions, whether it be, in this case, the government, or your customers, or legal teams, or anybody, the regulatory compliance, your insurer, all that good stuff. So yeah, this is huge, and it's actually a great topic that I think Rusty probably has a lot of experience in, at least from practice perspective, or has a feel for the ripple effects downstream. So Rusty, let me ask you, what do you think about something like that? The fact that this was so impactful, and it still continues to be impactful. How does it affect some of the practices, for example, or some folks that are downstream from the insurer?
Yeah, Vince, it had a huge impact, and I think if you look at what happens in the community practice, I mean, their lifeline is their cash flow from billing and services provided, and this had a huge impact. I mean, some practices didn't receive payments for many weeks, and it's just starting to see the trickle return. But yeah, it had a huge impact to all the community practices, and they're still seeing the ramifications of that today.
That's
Yeah.
nuts.
Yeah.
So how do you think community practices perceive cybersecurity?
Yeah, good question. I think on average, most practices in healthcare, they're focused on patients. And when it comes to stuff like cybersecurity, most practices source that out to a third party. And some of the larger, more sophisticated groups, they may have their own internal IT teams. But I think it's something that, because of what happened with Change Health, it has everybody's awareness up and they're more on guard. So I think that, if you look around the country, everybody has a different solution, but it's an opportunity to reevaluate what the practices are doing and how they can protect themselves, because they're connecting to different vendors, different suppliers. They have all kind of entrances in and out of the practice, and it creates opportunities for threats and risks for sure.
Absolutely. Do you think they truly understand whether or not the solutions they have in place? So I think of, so a lot of times when we're interacting with SMB, do you feel as though they truly have a handle on whether or not they're secure, or are they just taking the word of their IT organization or their IT service provider, whether it be an MSP or just that they're actually secure?
Yeah, I think those practices feel like they're doing a really good job, but they depend on third parties or others that are experts in this area. And I would think the average practice, probably it's not in their wheelhouse. This is not their area of expertise.
Hmm.
Healthcare is treating patients and dealing with insurance companies, all of the things they have to do to run their practice and serve their patients. So yes, again, it's a wake up call. It's an opportunity to reevaluate what you're doing, but also an opportunity to find out, are you partnered with the right partner? Are you getting the right service, the right level of threat? Are you educating your employees? And I think that's where a lot of opportunity exists, Vince. I think in the incidences that T brought up a few minutes ago, all of those could have had impacts with training. So, lack of training, lack of focus, lack of awareness. The corporation I came from, we had monthly testing and training, recurrent training throughout the year. And it has to be part of your DNA. Every day you're focused on security and risk. And you have to have partners that test your practice to make sure that you're getting the right level of security threat and also the right protection.
Who oversees or who has a responsibility for cyber within the practices?
It depends. Like the large groups, they probably have someone that's already IT, their IT expert. They may have their own site IT team. Most practices, the smaller to mid-sized practices, they outsource that in most regards. So they're leaning on someone outside the practice to provide that level of protection.
Hmm.
And again, they don't know what they don't know. So when they're negotiating these deals, they hear all these buzzwords. They may or may not be as familiar with each one of those, but they assume that they're being protected because someone offers this book of services to protect you for cybersecurity.
Hmm.
And the reality is, you find out after the fact that you didn't have the right level of security. Your exposure is huge, especially in healthcare. You're dealing with PHI. You've got patient information on file, diagnoses. You've got their they make their payments. They have access to credit cards and other payment sources. It's a big deal.
Yeah, so they have a HIPAA compliance requirement. They have PCI, right? If they're taking payments, they have a PCI compliance requirement as well. T, we talked about some of the fines. Can you just refresh my memory here? What would some of the fines look like for HIPAA or PCI on
Uh,
average?
Let me see this. So there's some different tiers. There's 4 different tiers. I think the lowest tier starts at something like $1,500 per occurrence, and it goes up to $50,000 an occurrence. So it's pretty
That's for
significant.
HIPAA?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
A good rule of thumb is about $184 per day per record.
So, Rusty, what do you think? Who owns the the responsibility for compliance versus the people that own responsibility for cybersecurity? I know we talk about IT being responsible for it, but at the end of the day, there's someone that has to sign off on the spend. And when we're talking risk, risk is beyond IT in an organization. You mitigate risk or you manage risk um, in an organization at scale. When we talk about a large organization, typically you have someone that's assigned to that just focuses on risk across the organization. But in these practices, who focuses on risk? Who is responsible for signing off on that spend for IT? And who's responsible for signing off on compliance?
Yeah, so ultimately, Vince, that comes down to the executive director of the practice and ultimately the physicians that own the practice. So that's ultimately where it comes. That's usually delegated down. There's maybe somebody that's in the practice that's responsible for securing IT contracts, cybersecurity, all of
Mhm.
that. Ultimately, to your point, it's the ownership of the practice. It's the physicians and the executive director that makes all these decisions. They're ultimately accountable to it.
Do you think we as a community need to do a better job at educating those executive leaders within the practices so that they understand the liability, the responsibility, the accountability that they've got to their clients as far as cyber is concerned? So it's not just about signing off on HIPAA and hoping nothing happens. You put your name there. And it's not just about outsourcing something and saying, okay, my IT service providers got me covered. Do you think we need to do a better job at educating them?
Yeah, I do. I think, T brought up something a few minutes ago about the HIPAA and breaches. I think the practices do a really good job of protecting the patient data. There's not like deliberate loss of data. That if it happens, it's
Mhm.
by accident. But I do think that the cybersecurity part of it, that's where there's an opportunity. I think again, until the Change Health incident, it's probably out of mind. I mean, it's there, but they assume that they're protected. And I think the opportunity to educate at a higher level to make sure the practice leadership, the physicians ultimately understand the impacts that can happen and the consequences of a breach. So, yeah, education has a huge opportunity here in this space.
So this has brought, the recent events have brought cyber as a risk to light for them. I still don't, we have a long ways to go, I think, to get people to truly understand their posture, their security posture versus the risk that they face. What's it really feel like for them though? So what's been the impact? Like I'm assuming that there's a cash flow impact, there's a business process impact. I mean, what's it feel like? What's the tangible stuff for these people?
Yeah, so the Change Health that had a huge impact to the practice. I mentioned earlier, the cash flow to the practice was disrupted from early February and has only recently started to see money starting to trickle in. So that's a huge impact to the practice. Who, in a community practice, especially, it's mostly buy and bill. They're buying drugs, they're infusion patients, they're billing for the drugs, and they're waiting for these reimbursements to come back. So that's their lifeline. So with this Change Health issue, it had a significant impact to all the community practices. I mean, if you go to the spring conferences that are just wrapping up, it's a hot topic at every meeting this spring,
A
for
likely
sure.
scenario is that so you've got these practices that are struggling just to deal with the financial impact of that breach at a higher level. What happens when one of them gets breached? So now they've got this cash flow issue or this operational issue or delay that they're dealing with. If they get breached on top of that, I mean, to me, that's a recipe for going out of business.
Yeah, for sure. So there actually were some practices that have been impacted since the Change Health event. So individual practices have had some fallout and some risk, and there's been some cyber attacks.
Yeah. And then imagine after the cyber attack, they also have to face the music. And then if they face fees or fines from regulatory bodies or legal, I mean, it just exacerbates the problem. So it's just, I guess what I'm trying to point out is that, if it happens at a higher level and it happens to you, it could really start being a very complex web of issues or risk for folks, and they need to start recognizing, because you need to identify the risk and what it represents for you. They need to start recognizing what can potentially happen to them as they educate themselves and prepare themselves for the proper strategy and tactics to mitigate all that risk.
Yeah, and I think some of the practice leaders feel like, you know, the long-term effect from this event,
Hmm.
uh, there's cash they may never recuperate. I mean, that's a huge impact, you know, have that loss of revenue, and then, you know, it takes years to make that difference up. So we'll see where it goes, but I think a lot of awareness over the last couple of months since the change
Hmm.
health event happened, that I think now is the time that people are re-looking and revisiting their security policies, their
Hmm.
cybersecurity threats and risks. Like, what is it that we need to do to improve our stance and make sure that we're protected properly?
What do you think some of their strategies are that they can foster for better collaboration between the business leaders and the IT or cyber organization to face these challenges effectively?
Yeah, I think if they're using an outside party, a third party, they need to make sure that who they're partnering with is a trusted, reputable company. They need to be asking the questions. And we talked earlier, you know, I don't think most of the practices when it comes to cybersecurity, they don't really know what they don't know. So when they're asking questions, they're not really equipped. So this is an opportunity to educate the market to understand what you should be looking for in a partner.
Mhm.
What are the things that your partner should have? And what are things you should do ongoing, like training, education, and all that. So picking the right partner is going to be really critical. And I think there's an opportunity now for practices to reevaluate that.
Yeah. So now we talk about, we talked about some of the larger organizations having attacks and in it impacting the smaller organizations that interact with them. On the flip side, do you think some of these larger organizations should be concerned or are concerned with the posture of all of the different vendors or practices or clients that they've got that interact with their systems? Do you think that there's a risk there that maybe uh, they're probably considering, they probably have infrastructure in place to be able to deal with that, but do you think that there's a risk there that we need to continually evaluate as things progress, as threats and the threat landscape progresses?
Yeah, definitely, 100%. I think any connecting into a practice, they should be aware of what their processes and what their security procedures are. And I think that's something that you'll see more and more of in the coming months. Will be an attempt to look at everything you're connected to ensure that you're not creating risk within your practice.
Hmm.
And what can you do to minimize that risk?
I want to add to that because one thing that's interesting to me is to think about not only being aware of your current risk, but also the risk in the future as you adopt new technologies. When you think about the Internet of Things, so heart rate monitors and other devices like that that are not specifically designed with cybersecurity in mind. And so as we continue to adopt those technologies, those are going to present new risks that we need to be aware of and mitigate.
Yeah, agree 100%. And so, yeah, the varying complexity of the technical environment that you've got in at the practice level. I think of it, emergency room in the hospitals, the emergency room technology that's there versus the operating room. Those are all things that need to some type of redundancy or resiliency. You need to be able to tap into them. They bring another level of complexity to cyber. What about all the virtual stuff? So what about, we talk about, just generally in the work industry, there's the virtual home worker, right? We recognize that they represent a lot of risk when it comes to trying to contain their connection into their corporate environments, especially if they're logging in via Starbucks Wi-Fi or if they're on an airplane connected via Wi-Fi. What risk does that represent in the healthcare space? I would imagine that there's virtual workers in healthcare, right, Rusty?
Yeah, so coming out of COVID, a lot of the workers did move remotely, and many of those did not come back. Those that are non-essential for the practice, a lot of those people are still working some kind of a modified type shift where they work remotely a few days and in the practice a couple of days. So yeah, you're right, that does create a lot of risk. The other thing too that I think of in healthcare, especially in community practices, they use a lot of apps and a lot of providers to help support the practice to make them more efficient. So they're often relying on third parties to help them with copay. Think about pharmacy. You know, most of the practices now have a pharmacy. So they have pharmacy dispensing software. They have different vendors to help them do their prior authorization. So all of these create risk. And I think the remote worker is a piece of that, but also think these other layers that are in the practice that create additional risk. As Keith brought out, you know, they're constantly upgrading, but then the threats, those people, the cyber attackers, they're always looking for new ways to get around those firewalls and how they can penetrate the practice. So the more exposure you have, the greater the risk. And I think when you do the education and training and making sure that your workers that are remote are doing it securely, that's really important.
Yeah. I forget who I was speaking with was talking about the fact that a lot of remote workers, although it's a best practice to VPN into your organization, right, to try to mitigate or to isolate the actual connection or transaction, will opt not to do it if because they're concerned that someone's looking over their shoulder, or if they've got private discussions or transactions, like looking at their bank accounts or whatever, Instagram, you know. They shy away from using technology that are actually required. So I think training and reinforcing is great, but also being able to identify when people are not doing it. So monitoring the transactions that are coming out when someone's connected to an environment or not connected and still working, being able to identify those scenarios, I think, are also very key.
Yeah, I think that's a key point, Vince. You brought up the VPN piece. I think a lot of people that work remotely, they know they're supposed to go through the VPN to connect. And because people are sensitive to, you know, being monitored, if they're on a work device, whether it's a work phone or work laptop or iPad, you know, they're not going through the VPN creates risk. And if they're going into apps and they get attacked, that could spread into the company. So there's a lot of opportunity for education. We've talked about that a lot today. I think that's a key part, educating the decision makers in the practice, but then ongoing educating and training and doing recurrent training with all of the employees in the practice to make sure that they're following the right recipe for success that's been set out by their, you know, whoever leads that in the practice for cybersecurity. Yeah. So T, like what does it look like with the risk for ransom type ware? So like when you think about the ransoms that are being paid to these big corporations, is it only the big corporations, or does sometimes the smaller individual, like a community practice or a hospital? I mean, do those kind of attacks happen there as well?
They do, yeah. So when you're talking about large organizations, they do get attacked. You know, folks, attackers know that they've got money to pay out. But what's happening though is that they're breaching these organizations through a data partner, through a third party, someone that's smaller, that has a weaker security posture. And so that's how they're getting into these large organizations. Smaller organizations, they don't think that they're you know, a viable target, but they are. Those folks are also at risk for being breached.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's absolutely something that's happening. Is small organizations are being breached because they don't have as sophisticated of a cyber posture.
And we hear a lot of scenarios where you've got folks in healthcare, there's dental offices, there's you know, regular practitioners where they are being brought down and held for ransomware. And so they've got to pay in like cryptocurrency and whatever in order to bring up their systems. The risk is they don't have the in-house expertise. Let's say they don't have a legal representative that is specialized in cyber to go in and negotiate with the attackers and the bad actors. They don't have that. That's not in place, and for the most part. And so it's not like you can call your attorney, you know, that you deal with for commercial situations, to suddenly say, hey, I need you to negotiate my ransom attacker. And so they'll go and they'll try to deal with it themselves, and they've got no guarantee that they're going to come back up. And so they'll go through that crypto transaction, typically send over that money, and then just hope that everything can be brought up. At the same time, they don't have the expertise in-house to look at the scenario and say, we've been brought down and held for ransom. Do we really need to pay that? Because do we have another way to bring ourselves back up and mitigate, you know, from an offense perspective, or a defense perspective, sorry, are we able to mitigate that breach that we've had? Ransomware, Rusty, exists everywhere. It exists with individuals like you and I and T, right? It exists with small, medium, large organizations, enterprise. It's at every level. There are no scruples. and no one is, can avoid that risk.
Yeah, and I think that's an awareness message. That's powerful that people have to understand that, look, it's not just the oil and gas industry, it's not Target, it's not these other breaches that, make the headlines of the news. It can happen at any level. And I think that's really important for people to understand, whether
Right.
you're a one doc solo practitioner or a large practice that's part of a larger group like an aggregator. It's important to know that you can be hacked at the individual level, and
Yep.
you don't have to be the biggest fish in the pond to get attacked.
Right. And held for ransom.
Yeah.
So what do we think the future of cyber and healthcare looks like at the practice level, dealing with GPOs, all that? What does that look like, do you think? How's it going to evolve?
Yeah, I think it's going to continue to evolve. I mean, I think we're still early in what I would call like really secure environments. I think what happened with Change Health is really going to accelerate people's approach to looking at their individual practice to make sure that they're covered and they're protected.
Mhm.
But as I mentioned a few minutes ago, as cybersecurity becomes more and more of a topic that's everyday topics,
Mhm.
it's going to be something that will continue to evolve. Companies will get better at creating better partnerships, providing security for the practices or any corporation. But again, the hackers, those that have ill intentions, they're going to continue to look for ways to get around those preventive measures.
Mm. Let me tell you, what do you think the impact is of AI? Because if a hacker or a bad actor is leveraging AI algorithms that are publicly out there, there's solutions offered as a service to someone with minimal hacking ability to be able to leverage. It gives them a full plan of attack, and they leverage AI. It suddenly becomes faster than any human can handle, and it suddenly becomes multifaceted because they come with a strategy filled with multiple tactics, and you're having bots come in and drive that attack. If you're at the practice level and you don't have any type of AI integrated into your cyber solution, you're fighting a losing battle. There's no way that a human can compete with the tactics that a bot driven or an AI driven attack, can bring to the table. I think
Vince,
the
I think
future is going to include a lot of AI within cyber.
Yeah, I think it's a great topic. I think if you look at the spring meetings that a lot of the practices are coming back from, two of the top three topics in every meeting was AI and how does AI fit into healthcare, and also cybersecurity on the back of the Change Health incident. So that's two of the top three topics at every meeting this spring. So you bring up a good point, and I think it's another opportunity for education as practices and businesses look for adaptation and how to adapt AI to better, to improve their systems and help them work smarter, more efficiently, and identify opportunities. It creates additional risk there. So I think hand in hand, AI and cybersecurity go hand in hand.
So it looks like it's complex in the healthcare space, like it's complex everywhere else in the world. So
For sure.
at least we know where we stand with some of it. But I'm glad there's folks like you, Rusty, that are out there that are trying to educate, that are trying to get folks to understand that, hey, you don't know what you don't know. Let me help you figure out, that gap. Let me bring, folks to the table, tools to the table to help address that. So I really value what you do from a cyber perspective in the healthcare community at multiple levels. So I know you're not just operating at the practitioner level or at the practice level. You also operate at various levels, whether we're talking, super groups or GPOs or whatever. So I mean, I think that's it's very commendable, and I really appreciate you doing that, and you being here today to help further, educate folks and drive that topic home.
Yeah, thanks, Vince. Appreciate
Yeah,
it. Glad to be here today.
I appreciate it, man. So understanding challenges, business executives in healthcare, you need to recognize and understand the specific cybersecurity challenges faced by your organizations, including regulatory compliance requirements and vulnerabilities stemming from legacy systems. Prioritizing focus areas. It's crucial for executives to prioritize investment in robust cybersecurity measures, employee training, and third-party risk management, particularly when dealing with entities like GPOs or aggregators. Assessing risks and perceptions. Executives must accurately assess cybersecurity risks and ensure that their organizations have a clear understanding of these risks. They should also be mindful of the potential impact of outsourced IT teams on their cybersecurity readiness. Mitigating risks and building resilience. Executives should implement strategies to mitigate cybersecurity risks associated with third-party relationships and invest in ongoing training and education of your staff. It's crucial. Effective communication between IT and business leaders is essential for building resilience against cyber threats. We really have to bridge that gap. And it's only through educating ourselves and educating the folks in our organization that we can really get there. It's something that we can achieve, but we've got to put effort towards it. And looking towards the future, business executives should seek to learn from success stories and best practices in cyber within the healthcare industry specifically. They should also participate in how cybersecurity and healthcare may evolve in response to emerging threats and proactively adapt their strategies accordingly. Well, all right. So I'd like to thank you, Rusty, for joining us today officially. Your insight and perspective from a business executive's point of view is really, really valuable. So I invite you to come back anytime, and you're always welcome whenever you want. Just let me know.
Thanks, Vance. Love to.
All right, cool. T, as always, thanks for joining and helping us as we drive through some of these important topics. And to our listeners, we'd like to invite you to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube and to engage with us on LinkedIn and on Instagram. We want to hear what you've got to say or questions you may have. Again, a special thanks to our sponsor, Cloud Warriors, for their continued support. Please visit them at cloudwarriors.ai. We hope you found our discussion insightful and empowering. Until next time, stay safe and secure.